I was thinking, one of the things that makes museums come alive are the tours that are available and the docents who give them. Now, I think that's a pretty, straightforward thing, for museums to have tours, but it's not something I really ever thought about before I was invested in the industry. I'll be frank, I don't think I could have defined docent 2 years ago, but if I had to guess, I'd make an honest bet that most regular people who haven't earned a whole lot of frequent flyer miles at museums wouldn't really know either. So that's totally okay. It's a funny word, docent. I actually looked up the origins of docent. It derives from the Latin word docere. I think that's how you say it. I don't speak Latin. It broadly means to teach. And I think that's really what a docent does. They serve as a guide in a museum who, through the provided insight of the artists themselves or the historical or cultural significance that the piece connects to, as well as the lived experience that they as a guide bring to the artwork, sharing their expertise on the works within that given gallery. Here at MAM, our gallery space is limited, so much of our work, both owned and loaned, are coming on and out of view rather frequently. What this allows for is fresh perspectives, new voices, that sort of thing to sing throughout the halls of our institution. It's a rather special situation. And what docents can do for an audience of museum goers is provide meaning and context to a given work and help visitors who join them on this tour the chance to connect with that piece of art and the art on view around it. Not only that, but also with themselves. I think a lot of people, and for a long time, me included, don't recognize the dozens of different ways that we can all interact with a museum beyond just strolling through the exhibitions and reading the wall labels. Museums are lively and interactive and should be a place where culture and learning live with the art, not just within it. It makes me wonder, what are other ways that people can experience a museum? Hi, Andy.
Hi.
Thanks for jumping in the pond with us on this one.
Of course, happy to.
Very much a cold call a couple days ago.
That's okay.
Tell everybody what you do here at the museum.
My name's Andy Kahnke. I'm a docent at the museum. How I describe docent to my groups that I lead are kind of a fancy word for tour guide, but it's somewhere between tour guide and lecturer. But I think where a docent is really different is that they're not just there to give you information, they're there to give you tools to interact with art and to facilitate a conversation about whatever it is you're looking at.
So every episode we try to pose a question. And so in this episode, the question is, what are, different ways, maybe unusual ways or lesser known avenues into accessing art. And I think immediately when this topic kind of came to mind, it was the docent program here at the museum. And it's not just here, it's every museum has docents and it has programs like this and tour guides and tour groups like this. But why do you think for a first time museum goer, or even a fourth or fifth or millionth time, why is it a different experience that might be worth exploring?
Oh, wow. Well, I think especially at MAM, and this is not advertisement for the program, but, at MAM, I think the docent program is really about helping you discover your own relationship with the art in a way that can be kind of difficult if you're by yourself. I think when I thought of docents before I became one, I thought of them more as very stern lecturers, kind of like gatekeepers.
Yeah.
I think probably because of other museums I've been to. So I think of them as people who, I also have an art history degree, and the worst professors just basically read you the textbook. And I think the worst docents read you the label on the wall. And I've had a couple experiences where you get read the label on the wall and it's frustrating because you're like, why am I on this tour? Why am I trapped in this group of people for the next hour?
Yeah. Well, I also think the thing with the wall labels are there to be read. You could do that independently.
Totally.
So the question is if you're on this tour or if you're looking for something different, what is a docent going to bring that's different than just the wall label? And I think that's what's, massively important.
Totally. And I think what a docent can help you do is A docent can take the intention of the artist or the historical context of the piece that you're looking at, and they can help you discover that through visual cues, through guided questions. It's kind of a muscle that you flex when you get comfortable with art, or when you're familiar with art, or you study or criticize art, kind of looking at all the contextual clues and deriving meaning from it. Mm-hmm. Now, what's fun is sometimes you look at something and you absolutely get the intention of the artist and you almost want to like pat yourself on the back. You're like, ooh, I saw what they were doing with the color blue or those repeating circles, and you feel really special. And then other times you have a totally different perspective of the art. You see something that the artist was not intending at all. And to me, that's almost just as exciting. And I think a really good docent, using things like visual thinking strategy, or people call it VTS, they can really help you develop that skill and practice it. So you don't just jump immediately to, oh, well, what does the label say? Okay, now can I see what the label said in the piece? It's almost like you're going the opposite direction. Like, first, let's absorb the piece and see what meaning we can derive from that, or what intention we can see from the piece. So that's why I like being a docent, and I think why I really like going on tours now.
Yeah. Do you find yourself going to, like, not judging, but going on different docent tours at other institutions? And
I do, and I also am the king of peeling off of tours if it isn't what I want it to be, which is also fair. I mean, even at MAM, I will have people peel off on tours, especially if I do like a first free Thursdays.
Yeah.
I think it's part of it is also understanding what someone wants to get out of a tour. I think there's some people who go on a tour and they want to be lectured at. They kind of want this artist went to this school and they studied with these people and these were their contemporaries, and that's why this piece is historically important. Like, that's just what some people want. It's not necessarily my style. I'm kind of like, read the label. Because it often has that information. But sometimes when I encounter that at other museums, I will peel off, just as every once in a while on like a free First Thursday tour, I'll see a group of people, when I keep asking them questions, kind of give each other the look like, this guy expects us to participate. That's not why we're here. And they kind of peel off. And I'm like, it's okay. You can.
It happens. It's all good.
Exactly. Like, the museum is here and the tour is here for you to experience it as you would like to. So if I'm not giving that to you, no hard feelings.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Do you find... I like to ask this to every docent, that whether I'm filming with them or just chatting and passing. Obviously, like, you're spending a lot of time with the art on tours. How often are you just one-on-one with the art without a tour, where you can actually like spend time and like have that like intimate or emotional or just personal?
You know, it's different for me. I feel like the only times I'm really at the museum when I'm not giving a tour now are, I like to come right before a tour. I like to come like 15 to 20 minutes early and just do a walk through the pieces that I'm expecting to look at. And I feel like I always think I'm going to do that, and then I get stuck on one piece. Like, I really like to just sit and be absorbed by a piece. I think the first time I went to the Louvre, I sat in front of Raft to the Medusa for 45 minutes. I said to my husband, I was like, you need to go. If you need to see other stuff, you need to go. But I just need to sit and be like overwhelmed by this. Like, when I saw Judith beheading Holofernes in the Uffizi in Florence by Artemisia Gentileschi, I was like, I'm going to be here for the next hour. I'm just so absorbed by this. So I kind of like to be absorbed by pieces. So I try to do that like right before my tours, see things I don't see, try to look around my assumptions. And I think the longer you look at something, the more that things like that happen. I'll try to do it again. When a new show opens, often it's kind of a whirlwind. You're seeing so many pieces at once that you don't get a lot of that time. But yeah, that's probably it. Like, right before my tours is when I'm spending time. And it's great too, because if you're coming right before a tour, no one else is. It's like me and Nisi. She's one of the guards in the museum. And it's just like the two of us in a gallery together. Yeah. It's actually like a really special moment that you're kind of totally by yourself in the museum.
What is what's your favorite? I guess to single out one work is tough, but like, what is, out of, We have the current roster. We have Interwoven Power. We have NJ Arts Annual. We have Shared Love. We have Families. Is there anything that jumps out? There's the Nanette Carter banner.
Yeah, I've only given a couple tours on these new exhibits so far, and I really have liked touring Parental Poncho by Kate Dodd, which is essentially a poncho of CAT scans of a brain or brains. There's something about it that is so, and again, this is where I have no idea if Kate Dodd would feel this way, but it feels comforting and macabre and kind of like sad, but well loved. It has a lot of complex emotions. And when I show it to groups, or I've showed it to a couple groups, they too, you just see like this confusion / familiarity in their face, which is really exciting. So I think, from New Jersey Arts Annual, it would be that. The piece that I haven't really worked out how to show this to groups, like they haven't responded, and maybe it's because I'm not exactly sure how I'm responding to it, but I really love Holly Wilson's installation. There's something about it that is just so mesmerizing, and like on paper it feels really simple, but there's something about it that really draws me to it. And I loved the installation before that. It was Saya Woolfolk for a really long time. Her installation was in there, kind of reimagining Crown for the Victor, and now Holly Wilson's
take
kind
on
of
it.
like shroud around it or shawl around it is, I like can't look away from it. I don't exactly know how to work with groups on it yet, but I keep finding myself just staring at it and like slowly moving around it. So I'm like, there's something.
It kind of pulls your eyes in and out of focus a little bit. And like obviously when you walk past it, the way that it moves, hearing Holly talk about it during the opening when she was here was really remarkable. Kind of like, she described it as like, obviously like you're not erasing the past and what was and what changed and what challenged and ultimately destroyed things. But also, how do you learn to like live with that and reconcile with it and grow beyond it and also with it? It's just like, and maybe I just butchered how she interpreted it.
Listen,
but
that's half of like being a docent too, is being like, I kind of half remember what someone said and now my own stuff is in there with it. That to me is how you democratize art. You say, yes, the artist may have had one specific intention for this, but the impact it's having on you is also valid. The history that you're bringing to it, even your perspective from I always say this to my groups. I'm like, I am often 2 feet taller than the group that I'm leading around. So we are literally looking at things from different perspectives. You are looking up at the art, and I'm often looking down at the art. And especially with something like Vanessa German's sculptural installation, they would tell me things and I would literally have to get on my hands and knees and be like, I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, yeah, you're right. There is a teacup down there. Like just things you literally don't see. So I don't know. I think that's where the perspective you bring to it informs the interpretation, or again, the impact it has on you. And that's what's great about it. Right. And I think it's why I don't like tours or things that are more, this is what this artist was doing here. This is exactly what this means. I'm like, okay, maybe they did, but also we all bring our own stuff to it.
Yeah. Speaking of bringing our own stuff to things, this is probably something I should have touched on in the beginning, but how did you find your way into museums? And you said you're an art history, degree, and like what was your first experience with a museum?
The first experience I can remember at a museum was in 9th grade. I grew up in a small town in Minnesota, small farm town. And there was a 9th grade field trip to New York City, theater trip. So, we saw Miss Saigon and Les Miserables and Ragtime and Stomp. There's some callback Stomp. Oof, man. But, we saw that and we went to the major museums, right? We went to Ellis Island and we went to the Met. And I remember going to the Met with my friend and running through the museum, basically, like a checklist. okay, what are all the most famous things here? I have to see them. I don't remember pausing at any of them. I don't remember really reading any of them. It was just like, oh, Sargent, check. Okay, Tiffany Lamps, check. Okay, Temple of Dender, check. Like, it was just like a checklist. And I'm sure I did the same thing at MoMA, right? Must see whatever the big thing, must see the Lilies, must see Warhol, check, 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 check. And part of it was probably because I just thought of it as, again, a checklist or something to do. And it wasn't until college, I had an art history 101 class. And I remember one of the assignments was we had to go to the museum and just like sit with one piece for a certain amount of time. And it was really eye-opening because there was nothing in that museum that was checklist, right? There was nothing famous. I mean, maybe there were important things, but just trying to feel comfortable there and remembering the discomfort of like guards kind of watching you, and you had to show your ID to get in, and it felt kind of like a mausoleum. Like no one else was in there except for people who were in that class. And yet again, there were just certain pieces that I would just stare at and stare at and stare at. And that was probably the beginning of it. And then having the art history degree really helped develop those tools of analysis and criticism, or even just making myself feel like, okay, I belong in this museum. I can go to a museum. Like if someone tries to pull attitude on me, like I know enough to stand up to some snobby docent, which is funny to say as a docent myself, but you know, it would be disingenuous to say that that didn't exist in certain museums, especially in places like New York. So yeah, I think just gradually kind of wearing down my own aversion to that, and also being encouraged with the major too, you know, that my voice was valid, that my opinion was valid, that kind of approach to museums and being involved is something. And then for MAM, I got involved because I was involved with Montclair, the nonprofit in town. I used to be the creative director there, kind of when it started, and then for the first couple of Prides. And MAM was a pretty good partner of us, like even at the very beginning. And the very first event Montclair ever did, the MAM art truck was there. Mm. And I think people were not really going to the art truck. So the art truck was coming out into the crowd, trying to be like, hey guys, come do a craft project with us. And I just was talking to Kat, who was working the truck that day. And Kat was like, you're really chatty. Like, do you know art? Would you want to be a docent? I was like, oh, no, not a docent. I couldn't be a stuffy docent. What? But she convinced me to look into it. And then we happened to be coming into a new group. And yeah, I signed up, loved it. Talked to, Noah, I think was running the program at the time. And here we are 4 years later, 3 years later, something like that. Yeah.
Backpedaling a little bit. But one of the earlier episode topics was how do you learn to look for the first time? And the story that you were talking about where you had to just kind of place yourself in front of a piece. Mm-hmm. For a first-time museum goer, for somebody who maybe has sped run the big ones like you did, I know I certainly did my first time at the MoMA. What advice do you have to slow down?
One big piece I'd say is, if you can, go to a museum that is a little bit smaller so you don't, or even maybe it's a little unknown to you, so you don't feel like you have to hunt out the capital I most important piece in the work.
Yeah, not trying to plug MAM right now. But
True. But
very small, rather honestly, intimate museum.
One of the things I say that I love about MAM is I'm like, listen, you could spend...
It's personal.
You could spend 3 hours in there or 30 minutes and feel like you got it, right? Like, and I love that about the museum. I love that.
And you're going to be surprised by what you find.
Oh, when the exhibits are relatively small, they're really special. Yeah. There's like a mix of like actually very famous artists whose names you will recognize and local artists who you might run into at the coffee shop all the time. Yeah. There is actually one artist who had an exhibit that I see all the time. And she has no idea who I am. And I'm always like, oh my God, that's her. Like, she's a local celebrity to me and she has no idea. But yeah, I'd say slow down. I'd also say wait for something to really jump out at you. And when something jumps out at you, stop and stare for a while.
That is
right? Like,
That's a special moment.
yeah, right? Don't think like, oh, look for the thing that's on the banner on the outside of the museum. Oh, well, I have to look for that. Like, that's the piece in the pamphlet. And it's like, no, that from marketing, that's probably just what worked. It's not that it's not good. But yeah, when you find a piece, stop and look at it for a while. And, the tips that I give to my group are let it wash over you for a while. And then, people want to jump to a story or a meaning. It kind of varies by age. This is one of the things you learn when you tour. But, like when you ask a children's group what they see, they go with color, shape, form. When you ask like a middle school and up group, they go to stories. They tell you the story of why something was created. And when you go to adults, they often try to relate it to other things, right? They're like, oh, this reminds me of X artist or Y artist. Like, so try to get all that out of your head and try to do all of it, right? Try to look first at the form, look at the color, then maybe look at what you think it actually represents, as in physically, like, is it a person? Is it an object? Is it a house? One really important thing to do is after you've been looking at it for a while, try to wash your mind of everything that you've seen. And one of the good things to do is like get farther away or closer. If you were farther away, get closer. If you were closer, get farther away. And try to pretend like you didn't have those conclusions, right? I think a good example would be right now, Karen King Choi has this great piece up in the lobby called Mount Rushmore Nieces and Nephews. It's great because when you're up close, you see all the detail. There's thousands and thousands of these like little stickers laid over each other with red wax on them. And you really it feels like you're looking at the topographical face of a rock. Like it does kind of look like a mountain, or the fur on this one person's jacket looks like a bush or fire. And you kind of only get that when you're up close. When you're far away, it is a group of 3 people. Period. End of sentence. You can't see the detail. You can barely see the like pixelation of them. So you see different things from different places. And then, you've been there for maybe like 6 or 7 minutes at this point. Start trying to marry them together. Like both of the things you saw are valid. Both of the things you saw are there. And I think one of the things people do worse, or how would I say that? I think one of the things that people do is once they think they know the answer, they move on. They're like, well, I've derived a meaning from this, moving on to the next piece. Let's take 2 steps down and look at the next piece. And really questioning, trying to forget that, or really trying to question, like, why did your mind go there and what else could it mean, is a lot of what we do in tours. Is we try to kind of like steer people into different directions or to kind of play devil's advocate, because it either gives you a different perception of the piece, or it often kind of like helps you even more firmly believe in the first interpretation you had, because you're kind of having to justify it against other interpretations. So maybe a lot of what I'm saying is like, it's time in front of the piece, it's questioning assumptions, it's changing your perspective. And it's not, it's giving yourself time with it.
There's so much time spent with the work in these, this hyper personal, hyper intimate kind of creation process for an artist. And then it goes out into the world. Mm-hmm. And it's in a museum, it's in a gallery, it's in a show, maybe it's privately purchased, whatever.
Yeah.
And then the artist has to walk back into that space on opening night and see that work again. Mm-hmm. And there has to be a different relationship with that. And I guess my question is, how does the dynamic, do you feel, shift in energy and emotion and meaning when it goes from a personal studio space to a gallery space? And do you think an audience needs to understand that, or do you think that they can kind of take it at face value and you don't need to know that change or that metamorphosis that kind of happened?
To me, And this is something I remember. This is one of those like deep conversations you have in your like art history seminar. Like, who does the art belong to? Where does the intention versus impact lie? Like, does it matter what an artist wanted to do if what actually happens from that art is totally different? And I think I've kind of always come around to the side of the relationship you have with the art and what it means to you, assuming that you can like justify it and see it and kind of explain it, is more valid once it's out in the world, right? Like, I think one of the things I love about being a docent is that I really try, and actually I was just speaking to, yesterday I met with the 2 mentees I have for the docent program. I was explaining this to them that as a docent, you're kind of a conduit for understanding as a group and accentuating and mediating their understanding and their relationship with the piece. And you're kind of trying as a group to come together to like the impact that it's having on all of you.
Yeah.
All of that's kind of the precursor to say, like, I love as a docent that like every time I look at pieces with a group, it can be totally different. I think the experience that they are having, they are reflecting, like they are seeing a reflection of that in the pieces, and that's valid to them. So you see that as a docent, and I think that's why, I guess, to go back to the genesis of your question,
The nucleus of it.
Yeah, like it feels like you almost have to just embrace the idea that like what people are bringing to the art is what it means to them, and that has to be valid. And I think if we're talking about demystifying museums and we're talking about democratizing art, you have to understand that like part of that is validating people's interaction with the pieces that you're showing them.
Yeah. We talk about, obviously, especially in your style, not even avoiding the wall label, but probably avoiding the wall label.
I hide it with my body sometimes.
Yeah. Is there a work on view where there's a story or an anecdote or something that is not present to the viewer and somebody who is going through independently would never recognize?
I don't necessarily share a ton of stories or like research that I know about the art unless it's like relevant or unless they're really stuck.
Yeah.
Well, then again, I guess I say that, but there's certain pieces like toured it a lot last year. I mean, must have toured it 24 times last year. Nick Cave's Sound Suit.
Yeah.
And I loved touring Sound Suit because it was it looks like a puzzle. I mean, I don't remember exactly all the things strapped to the harness, but there may have been a puzzle up there. I know there was an abacus and Jack in the Box.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's a Jack in the Box off the shoulder,
like an angel.
Yeah.
But it was something that was kind of fun to puzzle out with the groups, to help them. You know, again, first you start with the objects, like, okay, what do we see physically? Color. Okay, now let's go to our other senses. What might that sound like? What would that feel like if you were wearing that? Okay, now why would someone do that? And like, it was a fun exercise to go through because like, just the process of like kind of literally talking people through what they were seeing explained the piece itself and kind of like explained the backstory of the piece. And then when you actually gave them like the actual like background of it, it made it more salient to people, or it's like, hey, all these things that we were talking about, all these kind of like things that you were feeling inherent in the piece, well, guess what, you got it. Actually, that is what it is, right? And that's always kind of exciting to do. Recently, I just had someone do that with Parental Poncho as well, that they were talking about, you know, the brains and, well, it looks like something you would wear, but it's full of holes, so it doesn't look like it would protect you, or it would only partially protect you. And when someone says something that is basically the thesis of a piece, sometimes you just want to, it's hard not to almost like crack into a smile and giggle a little bit to be like, oh, you walked right into that story. Oh, that is exactly what they are showing. So maybe it's not the story behind it, but it's like, it's so exciting when you see, and through guided questions, like you see some like walk straight face first into like the intention of the artist or the wall label. You're just like, awesome. Art is awesome. You're like, that is what the artist wanted to show. And by asking you like 3 questions, you nailed it. You got exactly what this was supposed to be doing. And that's always really exciting.
Thank you so much, Andy.
Yeah,
Do you
of
have
course.
any parting words for anyone who's interested in taking a tour? Or
I guess I would say if you've never been on a tour at a museum, go on a tour. Don't be afraid to peel off. It's totally fine. Come to MAM. Like, Free First Thursdays is a great way if you haven't been here to see a lot of pieces, to experience a tour. Yeah, and just go to museums, right? They're cool. They're interesting. And if anyone gives you attitude, shrug it off. Like, that's their deal, not yours. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Andy.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. Thanks for sticking around to the end of Maybe Actually Museums Are For Me. It was great talking to Andy about his experience as a docent and, the relationship that you can have with museums that's different from just, walking around by yourself and, reading the wall labels in like an isolated manner. You can really have a community experience and enjoy art in maybe a way that's more personal and social than like the normal just walk about the galleries independently on like a Friday or a Saturday. But anyway, yeah, you can follow us on Instagram and Facebook. Our handle is MAM Montclair. That's MAM Montclair. You could also watch our video content on YouTube. It's like micro documentary stuff, exhibition highlights, art lessons, all sorts of cool stuff. You can also make a donation to the museum. The work that we do is fueled by the generosity of our community. So if you're feeling so generous, consider making a donation to our annual fund. You can find that direct donation link on our website. That's montclairartmuseum.org. And then I'm trying to think what else. What other things are there? Oh yeah, just in general, come visit us. You can find tickets online or in person. We're open Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. We also have really great occasional free events month to month, specifically. You could check out Free First Thursday. So yeah, swing by the first Thursday of November for a free after hours event. The galleries will be open. There's food trucks. There's a bar. It's a lot of fun. It's a great chance to really experience the museum if you've never been before. But anyway, that was Maybe Actually Museums Are For Me. We're in your feed every Wednesday around 10 a.m., give or take. I'm Alex Pavljuk, and I will chat with you next week.